The following video contains spoilers for Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. Some mid-game events will be shown and discussed, but the game's ending will not be covered. Also, this game's visuals contain flashing lights and screen shaking, which some viewers might be sensitive toward. Please consider these warnings before watching this video. If you're all good, enjoy. I believe it's safe to argue that the Ace Attorney series is one of the most unusual successes to come out of the game industry in the 2000s, but I'd also argue that it's also one of the most deserving of its success. While it was first released on the Game Boy Advance in Japan, the original Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney sprung up in the wake of gimmick-shackled titles on the Nintendo DS system, but it was its contemplative trial design and lovable cast of characters that helped it break free from the confines of the system's stereotypes, creating a successful multi-platform visual novel series from its totally unique premise. Despite its creator, Shu Takumi, having career history in action horror games like Resident Evil 2 and the Dino Crisis series, the current impressions of him as a game creator seem to lie in this character-driven puzzle adventure style of games. As a result, Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, Takumi's first original project after his first stint with the Ace Attorney series, feels both comfortably familiar and refreshingly new. I say all this full well in the know that it's been more than 10 years since Ghost Trick first humbly appeared on the Nintendo DS. It's admittedly taken me a long time to give this game a try, so long that I passed on the DS and mobile ports entirely. The recently released HD remaster was the ideal chance to give Ghost Trick my overdue attention, so at the rampant recommendation from avid fans and my friend group, I decided to try the demo on Steam. All things considered, it was a potent sip from the wine glass, so I didn't hesitate to pick up the full game. With the story complete and the puzzles solved, I look back at the fervor toward this title and try to see if it was all justified. I can't deny that Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is a weird game. A damn weird game. But as unfashionably late as I usually am to these sorts of things, it's an experience that I'd recommend in a heartbeat. The game's protagonist, a character named Sissel, awakens as a ghost in a dilapidated junkyard without a memory to speak of, with the only clue being a dead man's body at the scene. After a talking desk lamp named Ray fills the newly spirited individual in on the details of the scene, including the dead body that assumingly belongs to Sissel, a woman named Lynn is cornered and killed by an assassin nearby. Sissel then uses a mysterious power, reversing time to change fate and save Lynn from death. These ghost tricks are Sissel's tools that kick off a dramatic whodunit where the end goal goes far beyond Sissel's own missing identity. From dancing detectives to noisy Pomeranians, Ghost Trick creates a very unique vibe for itself, one that manages to separate itself just enough from Shu Takumi's prolific Ace Attorney series, while still retaining that series' colorful approach to heroes, villains, and everything in between. It's a real showpiece right out of the gate with its striking pop noir art direction and energetic but suspenseful soundtrack, though it doesn't take long for the drama to grab you and refuse to let go. Very much like its almost cartoonish lawyer game counterpart, Ghost Trick immediately makes the mystery of Sissel's death tantalizing. You'll want to know what happened. Ghost Trick's mystery angle is complemented immediately by its supernatural twist. As a spirit, Sissel can possess nearby inanimate objects and activate them. A guitar can be strummed, a door can be opened. So the big gist is using these tricks to the player's advantage. For example, Sissel can possess a gate which can extend with a ghost trick, allowing access to further parts of an area. While not every item in a location has its own trick, the game puts a sharp emphasis on using these skills to get around, forming chains of moves and abilities that make each stage its own giant puzzle. And with phone conversations letting Sissel travel along telephone lines and move to other areas, things don't stay in a single location very often. The environments are the puzzles, and learning how they all work is captivating and satisfying to accomplish. But Sissel can only move between inanimate objects if they're in close proximity to each other, keeping the player thinking of how to interact with the grander picture of each puzzle. In fact, the puzzles almost feel like platforming challenges in a way, as the player must navigate each layout within certain movement-based limitations. Sometimes the bigger difficulty isn't learning about some giant reaction of tricks, but simply how to get from one side of the screen to the other, which can leave you scratching your head for longer than you might think. It's a weird little subversion that makes each stage feel even more thoughtfully designed, where the player is guided by what each item is and where it's placed. The recurring Rube Goldberg machine idea is appropriate here because even the slightest change in placement can cause drastically different results. It's a simple concept whose intricate design only makes things more compelling. Something that especially impressed me about Ghost Trick's interactions is that while you can pause the game in the Ghost realm to move between nearby objects, outside of that realm, things move in real time. For example, you might need to possess a water pitcher, wait for a character to raise it in the living world, then dive back into the Ghost realm and move from the pitcher into an even higher object. This dichotomy doesn't just make for fascinating use of gameplay pacing, but really shows how different the living and dead worlds are. These worlds operate under different parameters, and as Sissel, the player is able to see how they are woven together so closely. This makes the solutions feel extremely layered, where the environment's tightly interlocked to develop limitations for the player. Overcoming these limitations requires understanding how the worlds affect each other, and while Ghost Trick is a simplified, more slimmed-down version of the idea, it's no less successful of an example. Very much like the Trials in the Ace Attorney and even the Danganronpa series, the 4 minutes before death sequences are rich with anticipation toward them. These sequences let Sissel travel back in time to reverse another character's untimely demise. It's the full stage production, the spotlit showing of the Ghost Tricks on full display. It's a prime example of the game's excellent pacing, which, while not unique to Ghost Trick alone, does build those peaks with a lot of consideration. It doesn't hurt that these sections are the puzzle design at its strongest, a way for all of a location's components, living or not, to come together. Building up to the sequences is masterfully done, while not in any way neglecting the exposition and less prominent puzzle parts that lead up to them. Really, there is a level of leniency towards Ghost Trick's puzzle design, especially in these 4 minutes before death sequences. You can rewind time whenever you feel, checkpoints and hints are both pretty plentiful, and trial and error is a common tactic toward what are often very linear solutions, especially when you aren't entirely sure what an item will do when Sissel activates a trick. Under these conditions, you might think Ghost Trick is a breezy puzzler that's lacking difficulty, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. It's one of those games whose priorities are more to push the player forward in the story than challenge them with some massive mind-bender of a puzzle challenge. That being said, even when it gets away from the intricate Rube Goldberg machines, it's still very impressive how each solution is steadily constructed from its components. Even in smaller, more compact examples, there's an incredible satisfaction in watching all of the dominoes fall after painstakingly setting them up. When all of the pieces are in place and the right tricks are used, Ghost Trick makes each puzzle hypnotically complex and a total joy to figure out. Ghost Trick's novel gameplay gist is great in action, making for awesome puzzle design, but I have a hunch that the puzzles aren't the only reason that Ghost Trick has become such a cult classic. Its story definitely does a lot of the heavy lifting. With its absolutely exceptional execution, the narrative powering Ghost Trick is a rich web of fate-driven circumstances that pan out with ironclad commitment. As more and more characters walk on stage, it becomes clearer and clearer that Sissel's end goal is more complicated than it appears, and by the final chapters, the layout of the stage is distorted to an almost unrecognizable form. Ghost Trick is actually a very mature game, and I mean that in the best way possible. It has its moments of comedic clumsiness, especially when it comes to the occasional misses on the dialogue front, but the way its story is framed makes Ghost Trick into a sophisticated look at some of the most difficult of emotions to confront. As the narrative progresses, characters that initially seem like mere set dressing for the game's puzzles and locations end up having far more purpose than you might think. Each member of the cast has a story, and while some do carry more narrative weight than others, their relationships with each other resonate deeper and deeper. When the story goes full circle and you realize how certain characters are connected, it's a fulfilling revelation. But once the story enters its last few chapters, the devious hands of fate only become more visible. Really, there's a kind of dark absurdity in Ghost Trick's storytelling, and almost Kafka-esque development in how these characters, several of which have no direct connection to each other, are ultimately drawn together by the narrative circumstances. I'd like to re-emphasize the word fate here, because Ghost Trick uses the idea of spontaneous connections to bring out the most interesting parts of its cast, all for the sake of a compelling story. Furthering this absurd vibe, Sissel is a supernatural being, using clearly fantastical skills to roll back these deaths. At first, this didn't really gel with Ghost Trick's more serious messages to me. Instead of grounding the player in reality and forcing them to confront these negative emotions in a practical, real-world application, you can simply time travel and just make sure the deaths never happened. In all honesty, it felt like a get-out-of-jail-free card, and while so many other games have forced the player to face negative emotions head-on, Sissel's abilities make Ghost Trick's stakes much lower. When you can just fix things in the past, it's more difficult to feel the weight of its current events. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt I was being unfair to Ghost Trick. Sure, you can just time travel and prevent the deaths from ever happening, but that doesn't mean that the game completely invalidates its artistic messaging. What I'm trying to say through all this is that the lessons that Ghost Trick wants us to learn are there. The ghost powers might be the method to which all these changes occur, but they simply couldn't be used if the characters didn't have a clear motive behind them. Unless they found a viable reason to, no one in this game's story would bat an eye toward each other. Character motivations are difficult to convey within games because making the player give enough of a damn to help what's essentially a fictional character takes a lot of skill. That makes writing characters in an interactive medium a very underrated position, which is why I give scenario and dialogue writers like Shu Takumi, Kazutaka Kodaka, and many others in the field the credit they rightfully deserve. Not to say that a well-written game is a totally equivalent substitute for one with well-tuned gameplay, but they overlap often, with no better example being the visual novel subgenre of games, which Ghost Trick, debatably anyway, fits into pretty comfortably. Motivation is a powerful tool in games, but it goes far beyond just what the player wants in order to solve a puzzle or defeat an enemy. If a game writer can make a character's motivation into the player's motivation, that's where you really start to see it flourish. Ghost Trick manages to construct its cast with a key drive, where the characters want to know the truth and use that truth to help others in their lives, even if that reality is tough to swallow at first. Sissel and Lynn's relationship might originally be based on a mutually beneficial exchange of information, but by building their emotive profiles, they become partners and even full-on friends. By the game's last few hours, these characters want to help each other in any way they can, and I think that was Takumi's goal, for the player to internalize their motivations. With such an emotionally complex cast, the mystical ghost powers tend to lose their fictional facade. The players care more about why these characters are doing what they're doing instead of the totally supernatural how. Anyway, Ghost Trick's story is incredibly ambitious, drawing its characters together with such meticulous care, while also delivering a masterclass of twists and turns that's certain to compel in so many ways. But despite its darker moments, it does this without any cynicism to speak of. Beyond its fantastical impossibilities, Sissel's journey manages to make its cast as complex and human as anyone could possibly be, giving the player endless reasons to care about all of them. I've spoken highly of several games' narratives in the past, with many implementing their stories in very diverse ways from each other, but Ghost Trick really does fascinate in how all of those little quirks gel together so cohesively, all without that bitter cynicism that seems to appear in so many game stories nowadays. Ghost Trick's message, even through all the drama and struggle, is a positive one that should absolutely be remembered. There's something sort of nostalgic about games like Ghost Trick. Those weird little experiences that show larger publishers and more seasoned developers displaying faith toward the strange and experimental side of game creation. Maybe the DS's unusual hardware was a part of this, but trend chasing isn't a rare move for any artistic medium, especially when money talks so loudly. So in a way, it kinda makes sense that Ghost Trick's poor commercial performance influenced Capcom's treatment of the name. But for damn good reason, it's still treated as a cult classic by many avid supporters. It's deserving of that praise, incredibly so, as its strikingly experimental game design and ambitious narrative are the kinds of things that would hopefully resonate with the up-and-coming game developers of its time. Despite Capcom's past neglect and seemingly reluctant desire to re-release it, Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is a game that's comically easy to recommend. Shu Takumi and his team made a game so weird, so refreshingly unique, that I'm kicking myself hard that it took this long for me to experience it. We can't rewind time like Sissel, but there's still time to think about our past missteps. Skipping out on Ghost Trick Phantom Detective back in the day is a clear and shameful mistake I made, one that I couldn't be happier that I got the chance to rectify.